Let us now understand how to manage state with useReducer. We have seen some of the example and we have completely understood about structure of useReducer. So now we are going to see actually how this useReducer is going to manage the state. So first of all, you should always keep this in mind. useReducer is an alternative way of setting and managing our state. And it is one of the most important React hook which allows us to manage the state of components. So this is how we are going to write our useReducer. Inside this we have state, we have dispatch, then we are having this reducer function, and finally we are having this initial state. So useReducer is nothing but it is a function which we are going to call along with reducer function and its initial state, and in return it is going to return state and dispatch function. So simply useReducer is a function which will be called with two arguments, that is reducer function and initial state of our application, and in return it is going to return array in which we are going to have our state and dispatch function. So now inside this state we are going to store related pieces of state in a state object, and this is the example. Inside this initial state object we have given one property counter, and for that we have assigned the value as 0. And for this state, you can either pass primitive value or you can pass object. But mostly, whenever we are working in complex application, we are simply going to pass object. And why we are using state? Because inside this state, we are going to store related pieces of a state. And this initial state is going to be assigned to this state. So that is the reason we have given initial state and we have created object. Inside that we have passed a state, that is counter as 0. Now we already know our useReducer needs something called reducer function in order to work. So our reducer function is going to contain all the logic for updating our state. This is how we are going to define a reducer function, and it is going to take care of updating the state, and it will allow us to move all the state update logic from individual event handler to one central location. If we are using useState hook, then for each and every operation we have to create separate function and accordingly we have to perform the action. But when we are using useReducer, all the state update logic we are going to shift to one central place, that is inside our reducer function. And this separation of concern makes our component much cleaner and easier to read. If you are a beginner, then by looking at this, you can easily tell when I am performing increment, I am increasing the value by 1. While I am performing decrement, I am decreasing the value by 1. So by reading these cases, you will understand what operations we are performing. So at one central place, we are going to shift all the state and we are going to perform our state update logic. And this reducer function is the one who is going to update our state object. So whatever operation we are going to do inside the state, that operation will be performed inside this reducer function, and it is the one who will be updating our state object. And this is a state object, and based on the operation or based on the action, our object will be updated. So it is very similar to setter function inside this useState hook, but it will be having more superpowers. But when we are using useState, for each and every update, we have to create different event handlers. And if we are updating multiple things inside the UI, for each and everything, we have to create state variables. So at one point, we are going to mess up with all the state variables and we have to write lot of code. But using this useReducer, inside reducer function itself, we are going to pass entire logic of state updating part. But when we are using useReducer, inside this reducer function, we are going to pass all the updating logic of a state object. And this reducer is nothing but a function which will take current state and action as its parameter, and based on those values, it is going to return the next state. We can also call as updated state. And this reducer is a pure function, which means no side effects are allowed inside the function. It is always going to return the new state. Whatever previous state we are having, it is not going to update that state. Instead, it is going to return the new state. So states are immutable in React, which means a reducer is not allowed to mutate the state. You can also tell a reducer is not allowed to change the state. So whatever initial state we are having, that we are going to pass here. And talking about action, it is simply an object that is going to describe how our state should be updated. So this action will be passed inside dispatch function, and based on that action, we are going to perform this operation, and accordingly, we are going to return the new state. That is, we are going to return our updated state. Now the next logical question is, how do we actually trigger state update? So for that, we are going to use dispatch function, and using this useReducer function, we are going to return this dispatch function, and this is a function using which we can trigger state updates. And inside this dispatch function, you can see we have passed object, and this object is nothing but action, which is having type property and payload property. And accordingly, based on this type, we are going to perform our operation, and we are going to return our next state. Here I have given increment. So increment will be executed, and based on this value, I will be getting my new updated state. So instead of using set state to update the state, we are now going to use dispatch function to send an action from event handler to the reducer. You can see inside this onClick event handler, I have given this action. From here, I am going to send this action inside the reducer, and I am performing my state update. So these are the few pieces you have to understand. Only then you will be able to understand how to manage state with useReducer. So you should know what is state, what is dispatch function, what is useReducer hook, how it is called, what is reducer function, what is initial state, and what is action.